Welcome back to the Graduated and Grown podcast. I am particularly excited for today's episode. I'm also just pretty excited in general because I enjoy the holiday season. I am excited for really 2 weeks of enjoying life, a little bit of relaxing, a little bit of traveling. I'll give you all those updates in the new year. But I'm really excited about today's episode because I had the honor of sitting down and chatting with someone that I've been following on social media for a few years now. And literally every time she pops up on my social media timeline, I'm liking, I'm saving, I'm sending to someone because she's so insightful. So I got the opportunity to sit down with Danielle Bayard Jackson, who really embodies the role of being a friendship educator, right? You guys know we're in this friendship series, so we're talking about friendship. Danielle explains that there's a difference between a friend and being in community with people. So that was really interesting. We talked about being vulnerable in relationships. And again, I don't want to spoil it, but she opened my eyes to the fact that vulnerability isn't necessarily you bearing your soul to people. Really, vulnerability can be anything that you would define as a social risk. We also talked about how to build stronger and deeper connections with those that we're already connected with. And we also talk about conflict in friendships, and she gives a lot of great pointers around that topic. So, like I said, I'm so excited for you guys to listen. For a little bit of background, Danielle is the director of the Women's Relational Health Institute. She also is an author. She has a book called Fighting for Our Friendships: The Science and Art of Conflict and Connection in Women's Relationships. And she's been featured in so many major news outlets like the New York Times, Oprah Magazine, and Good Morning America, just to name a few. Like I mentioned earlier, I've been following Danielle on social media, but I also enjoy her content on her podcast called Friend Forward. And if you're enjoying this series where we're talking about friendships, you would love Danielle's podcast because it is literally dedicated to friendships, right? She also hits on relationships. She did a few episodes about male friendships, which we will talk about actually in a few weeks. But her episodes, her videos, literally anytime you hear Danielle's voice, you will always hear insights. You're going to hear about the research that she's done. You're going to hear about the research that she's done. And you're also just going to hear, and you're also going to hear about her real world experiences. So I really appreciated this episode, not only because I learned so much, but I think Danielle also does a great job of opening your eyes to different perspectives that makes you go, oh, I guess I didn't think about it in that way. So we had a really great conversation. I'm so excited for you guys to listen. So I'm going to stop talking. And I think it's time to dive into my episode with Danielle Bayard Jackson. You are literally a friendship expert. You're a friendship coach. So today we're going to talk about friendship, which is one of my favorite topics to talk about, especially since graduating college, because I've realized that friendships change and friendships take a lot of work. I don't think I realized that like before, but now I'm like, oh wow, I have to like nurture these relationships. But before we get into the meat of the episode, I like to do a few icebreakers just so that I can get to know you a little bit better, and so can the audience. And so these are pretty related to friendship. So here's the first one. If you could be best friends with any historical figure or celebrity, who would it be and why?
Ooh, historical figure celebrity. Oh gosh, that's such a tough one. I don't know, that's a tough question, but I
Yeah.
feel like I feel like any woman who's in the literary feminist space
Yeah.
is somebody I'd be excited to befriend. I don't know that I'd be able to offer the same kind of insights they would, but just the idea of being in friendship or community with such powerful thought leaders, anybody who kind of represents that would be somebody I'd want to befriend.
I love that. Okay, nice, nice. So tell me, if this is also a hard one, if your friendships had a theme song, what song would it be? It doesn't have to be a
Oh
song
gosh.
about friendship. It could be, there's a lot of songs about like women's empowerment. I'm not a Swiftie, but I feel like a lot of people say, oh, Taylor Swift songs are all about women's empowerment. So it could be that song, any type of song. What song would be a theme song for your friendships right now?
Oh gosh, I these are really good questions. I don't know of specific songs, but I will say when I think of Destiny's Child, it operated as such a soundtrack of my life growing up and
Yeah.
in friendships I had as a young woman. So I feel like anything that's like a girl group would be probably essential to and representative of my friendships.
I love that. That's really awesome. I like that answer. Like I would probably say the same thing. And I think also I am in this phase of my life. Well, I've always had really good girlfriends, but now I'm like, okay, like the girlfriend community, having like a little girl gang really is ideal. So love that answer.
Mhm.
And then this is like shifting away from like the fun answers a little bit. But like I said, you are a friendship expert. What would you say are some of the most common issues or themes that you've seen in your research, specifically for women that are around my age? Like post grad, we finished college, we're a few years out of college in that 25 to 34-year-old age range.
The most common one is just navigating transitions. That's kind of essentially a theme throughout the life cycle of womanhood, but especially in this area, this bracket, so that like mid 20s to early 30s range is when women begin to come to me. It's likely because for many of them, they realize for the first time that they have to facilitate a lot of connections for themselves for the first time. When you're younger, you have mom and dad encouraging you to go play with friends. When you're in school, you literally have time dedicated to socialize. So being in the cafeteria, recess, and for those who followed a quote unquote traditional path of going through college, when you come out around early 20s, mid 20s, it's the first time you don't have those like that same social infrastructure to help guide you and help you facilitate and even introduce you to connections. And so, that experience is consistent with the research as well, which finds that your social network grows and grows exponentially until about the age of 25 or 26, at which point there's a decline. And around the same time as when maybe people are, graduating from college, you're going back home, you're prioritizing different things. You have some of your women friends who are prioritizing career and they're doubling down on putting in lots of hours at work because they want to advance. You have women who are prioritizing establishing family ties. You have women who are moving or going back home, whatever it is. But now those goals begin to serve as competing interests. And we
Mhm.
realize, oh gosh, if I want to connect with people, if I want to keep friendships going, a large part of this is going to be my sole independent responsibility. And it's not something you're taught to do. So I would say that that's probably like the number one thing I hear for that particular age group because of the unique challenges that they're experiencing at that time in their lives.
I love that 1,000%. And I was talking to a friend about that in a previous episode. But like when you lose that, like you said, infrastructure, that structured environment that a lot of us were in for at least 18 years of our life, or some of us 22 years of our lives, it changes a lot. And a lot of people get a sense of that structure in like their work environment. But I think post pandemic, there's a lot of people like me, I'm fully remote, right? So I'm not seeing my coworkers often versus someone, if you're going into the office 3, 4, 5 times a week, there's a little bit of a structured environment, and depending on like the demographics of your company, maybe you do find people that you can connect with. But I love that that was your answer, because I found that to be so, so true. And you have a book, it's called Fighting for Our Friendships. Tell me what inspired you to write that book, and tell me about the research that you did in order to inform the information that you talked about.
Yeah, so I never set out to write a book, and I always feel bad saying that because I know some people, that's a big dream, and they've invested so much time to try to make that happen. I think for me, the idea really sparked because someone commented on social media after a video and said, I'm just over here waiting on your book. And I kind of chuckled to myself and I thought, like, well, actually, it does make sense to have all of these videos that I do that 50% of them I outline beforehand. I'm not just, in bed and thinking up an interesting thing to talk about. It's outlined or it's stuff that I've already shared in a more formal capacity during a keynote or workshop. And I'm kind of making it more accessible to the everyday Jane on the video, but it's been outlined, it's been researched. And so I thought it does make sense to have a consolidated space for this to live in an organized and tangible way. And so, the goal of the book is just to help women become more relationally resilient and also to help them understand from a more aerial view or sociological view the mechanics of women's friendships. And I know that's very broad and there are lots of different kinds of women, and I understand that. But to help women say, oh, I see what's going on here from a larger view. I know what's happening. I see the bigger picture, so we don't get caught up in details. And so we wanted a portion of the book to outline the research on women's friendships, and then a portion of the book to give us the tangible tools to navigate the day to day business of being friends. And I saw so much literature that was either one or the other. It was very highbrow with psychological concepts that were interesting, but you still had to kind of chew it up and figure out what to do with it. And I also saw a lot of friendship books that had lots of tips and tricks, and that's helpful as well. But how do we, how does this all work together? What's the larger idea here of what's going on? And so the book was an attempt to answer that question.
Very excited to read the book, but tell me, what made you even want to study friendships? Like, is this something that you were interested in even when you were, let's say, in high school, or did this start after then? Like, what made you want to pursue research on friendships?
Yeah, so I always joke that it certainly wasn't on my vision board when I was
Yeah.
10 to say I'm going to be a friendship, educator. Excuse me. It really started accidentally. So I was a high school English teacher for about 6 years at one of the largest high schools in the US, and then I worked my way up to being the academic department chair, leading 30 teachers. And I think I was really fascinated by the fact that most of my female students, the main thing they wanted to talk about between classes and after school was their friendships. It was the number one thing. Whenever I would be facilitating department meetings, it came up in the meetings more often than not, and it wasn't even on the agenda. But we had a front row seat to the ways that issues of connection and belonging were impacting everything else. If you have a young lady or a young man who feels like, I don't have people here, people don't like me, they're not coming to school. When they come to school, they're not raising their hand to participate because so and so in the back is laughing at me or judging me.
Yeah.
They are not focused because they're worried about other things, so they can't be present. We saw how it impacted them socially, academically. And so it was almost like an unofficial lab to watch those mechanics go down and watch them try to navigate friendships and kind of floundering and figuring out what's going on. And after 6 years, I left the classroom and got into public relations. And I suddenly found myself working with these charismatic, high achieving women. And my job was to get them increased visibility. So I'm putting them on TV, we're doing podcasts, the whole thing. But in these pockets of conversations on the side, they too were expressing dissatisfaction in their friendships. But at this stage, you're not leading with that, right? Because if your whole thing is to project yourself as a successful, put together business owner, you're not going to admit publicly that you can't even get friendship right. Something that's
Mhm.
supposed to be so natural. What's wrong with you? And so I began to see, wow, at every stage of womanhood, we're trying to figure out, how do I navigate relationships with other women? And so for the past 7 years, I've been leveraging my background in education to study what the research tells us around the ways that women cooperate, communicate, and engage in conflict.
I love that. And I love that you specifically mentioned that you were working with like these high achieving women that probably are doing so many exciting things with their career, and they're still, a part of their life where they're maybe dissatisfied or still trying to figure that out. And I think like people that are in my age range, like after graduating from college, right? There could be a lot of great things. There could also be a lot of stressful things. But I think one common thing I've noticed is that a lot of people are looking for community, whether you
Mm.
moved back to live with your parents for a few years, like maybe all your childhood friends moved away, or maybe you moved to a brand new city. And that's obviously a whole new thing of really building your community brick by brick from the very, very beginning. So, from your perspective, what is the definition of community? What exactly is it? Is it, I mean, I feel like when you're growing up, like your community is your neighborhood, but what does it mean in terms of relationships and friendships?
Yeah, so I always like to make the distinction, I say, between little c community and big C community. Little c community, if you were to look up the actual definition, it says something about like organisms or people who share the same habitat or circumstances. So just the fact that we live in this neighborhood, we are in a community, people who live here. Okay. A lot of those very technical definitions of it is describing people who happen to find themselves with shared traits, shared geography, shared interests. And because of that, we're community, meaning I'm in the group of people who live here or like this thing. I'm in the deaf and blind community, the handicapped community, whatever it is, right? Because I happen to have this circumstance. But capital C community, That's more intentional. Everybody here is an active participant. We choose to be here. We have a positive spirit about being here. If
Mhm.
you have people who are sowing seeds of discord or talking crap about the community, we do not have a community.
Mhm.
There is shared power. We are co creating solutions. There's no one leader. We're engaged in dialogue. And my job is not just to come here to take, I am required to give. And so I take pretty seriously and hold a deep reverence for that word because there's a difference. So it's increasing in popularity, especially with brands or like join our newsletter, join our community. And
Yeah.
I get that, right? I think they're starting to see that community is a key piece of getting people involved in whatever you're trying to do. But a lot of times, yes, they are appealing to your natural desire to belong to something bigger. So they're using that word. But we need to assess, am I looking for little c or big C? And what is required of me to belong in big C community? Because it's not about you just being serviced, you are required to contribute as well. And so that's kind of how I think of community, is by those two distinctions.
What are some things that are required of people that want to be part of Big C community?
So the first is listening and observing.
Mhm.
What's happening? What's happening in this group? What are their unique challenges? What are their needs? Right. A lot of times we come in and we know that we have a desire. We're coming because we're lonely. We're coming because we want to take something. But I need to listen. What does this community need? Let me get to know the people and build relationships in this space. What do I have to offer? Can I commit of my time and energy to really be here? What is my capacity for being grieved or offended? Which is a whole other thing. But if at every offense I'm ready to leave, I do question your degree of commitment. You know, can you be in community if you don't have conflict resolution skills? They go together. Um, so those are some things to kind of consider if you're like, okay, am I ready to be involved or to build community? And then also the degree of power you are looking for, because like I mentioned earlier, it's about shared power. If there's one boss talking to everybody else and then they go and carry out and execute that person's vision, you know, to what degree is their community here? And I know I'm speaking pretty broadly, but I think those are questions worth asking if you are ready to build that or be involved in that. You know, are you trying to build a squad? Are you trying to build newsletter subscribers? There's nothing wrong with that. And that's a way to be quote unquote successful in business, is to have that kind of following and reach. But community with a capital C would be something entirely different.
Have you found that people have different pockets of community, or do most people belong to like one community and that's all they need or want?
Yeah, I don't know about like how many communities on average people have. I haven't read anything on that, but I have, read research that finds that people who have relational diversity are healthier and happier.
Hmm.
So it's one thing to have community with your neighborhood, like y'all have neighborhood events and stuff like that. Like, of course, you 100% need that. But a person who has her neighborhood friends and her happy hour friends and her church friends and her work friends and her friends from the dog park and her friends from the PTA, she is happier and healthier on average than the person who's just connecting with their neighbors. And there's tons of research on this. This is not just because of one tiny little study from 10 years ago. Okay. The idea is that for two things. One is you are a multidimensional person. So it helps to have people who can reflect the various intersections of your identity back to you, or at least offer affirmation and understanding if they don't share the identity. So for me, I'm Black, I'm a woman, I'm a mom, I'm a Christian. It helps to have people in those spaces who kind of get it, right? I don't need you to be a Black Christian woman, mom, but if you see my Blackness, if you can affirm, man, motherhood looks really hard. If share the same faith, sometimes we can speak in a shorthand, like you
Hmm.
get it, you kind of get some things that I'm going through, or my language, right? So it helps to have various communities. And the second thing I'll say, and the final thing on that is, I don't necessarily think that it means, like the findings from this research, I don't think they're necessarily implying that a person who has tons of friends is automatically happier than a person who doesn't. I think what's really happening is, if a person has gym friends and faith friends and I don't know, happy hour friends, it says something about the person's lifestyle. So I am
Mhm.
working out and taking care of my body, and I am, praying and involved in something spiritual that extends beyond myself, which people who do, the research tells us, report less experiences of loneliness. People who believe to
Mhm.
something large, they're a part of something larger than themselves. So it says something about your lifestyle if you're involved in lots of different communities, and about your holistic health. So, I think those things are worth keeping in mind, because I know it's popular to say, well, all I need is, my two girlfriends and I'm good. And I can appreciate that for sure, especially if you're saying I'm close with two tight people. Totally get it. But I respectfully disagree that that would be the only connections that you need.
I definitely agree with that. And I found that a lot of people are craving community, but they don't necessarily know how to go about building community. So, one, would you say that there's a different mindset when you're looking to make friends versus building community? And then two, how can people go about building their community or strengthening their community?
Oh my gosh, I love that. Yeah, I also I like leaning into the distinctions between community and friendship. So I might be in communities with people who aren't necessarily my friends. So for example, I have young children. So if we go to my son's soccer game on Saturdays, those are like my people on the sideline. Like I see you every Saturday, and we share resources, and we give each other tips. Oh, that there's this program for the kids, you can sign up next week. Oh, I didn't know that. So we're in this community, we're impacted by the same things, and we share certain views, right? So these are like my people to some extent. These women are not necessarily my friends. I know that sounds harsh, but I don't necessarily see them as my friends, but we are very friendly. I don't
Mm-hmm.
really see them as my friends. And now, community is a place, a good breeding ground for friendships, because we're chatting, we're seeing each other consistently. Maybe we discover we have the same sense of humor, we have shared goals. You know what I'm saying? So it's a good breeding ground for friendships to blossom. But friendships are, totally elective, and you are opting to have this mutual ongoing relationship with another person. And that takes more, it requires more attention, intention, care, mutual aid. You know what I'm saying? So, and if I'm in a community, that's one thing, and these are my people, and I have a certain duty and obligation to my community, but individually they might not be people I have friendships with. But friendships do emerge within community, and friendships, like a friend group, can offer a sense of community. I'm a part of something bigger than myself, right? But I think what happens is a lot of people who are looking for friendship aren't involved actively in any communities. And that's one of the ways to find friendships, is to already be actively involved in capital C community. Could be one way to kind of like help that get going.
And I love the examples that you gave because, like, taking your son to his soccer practices and games, like, yeah, maybe those women aren't your friends, but like you said, you're very friendly, you're sharing resources, probably enjoy seeing them and talking with them, but you maybe don't talk to them about the same things that you would talk to your friends about, or you don't have the same expectations from them versus an actual friend. So I love that example so much. Moving on to talking about deepening friendships. So I feel like on TikTok, maybe, well, it comes and goes, but every once in a while, there will be a conversation about levels, tiers, or categories of friendships. Do you believe, I'm sure you do, but do you believe that there are levels of friendship? If so, what are your personal, or based off research, what are the levels of friendships?
I do see that conversation a lot around levels or tiers and things like that. And some critiques I have seen on social media of that is like, oh, this is so petty, and this is so like meticulous and technical, and you shouldn't be categorizing your friends. And I can appreciate that, and I do think it can become that if you're, articulating that every time a person does something you don't like, you're like, I'm moving her down, then I can see where we're getting like, it's a little MySpace top 8, right? But you do you do have the people you socialize with on different levels that might be uncomfortable to say, and you might not even be aware, but you do it every time you decide, I'm going to spend my Saturdays with this person. when you find yourself texting preferred people over others, when you find yourself only opting to hang out with certain people in a group setting, but you're not as interested or motivated to hang out with her one on one. So the people you're sharing your time, your life updates, your resources, whether it's financially, the people who feel to you worth commuting for. There are some people in your life you will take the train the 45 minutes. Others you're like, she's really cool, but like I'm not as interested. You do it all the time. So you are creating and deepening certain uh levels and distinctions every day. And so that's just kind of like what it is. Now, there is some research that suggests that you only have the cognitive capacity to maintain 3 to 5 ultra close relationships. And this
Mm.
is from a theory referred to as Dunbar's number. And some people have pushed back on that, but I've seen a lot of studies that mirror the same finding. So I stick with it. And the idea is that, I mean, think about how much is required of you to maintain ultra close relationships. I mean, I gotta show up for you. I have to like listen to the things that you're going through. I have to remember them to come back to you and be like, hey, how's your dad, doing, what's going on, people I'm sharing with. It requires a lot to have something deep. It's not possible to do that with everyone, and the good news is, I guess, good news is it's also fluid. So somebody who's really in that circle this year might not be next year just because of circumstances. Maybe I moved, maybe we just ended up talking a little bit less. Maybe this other friend who was on like an outer ring of my life, we both got pregnant at the same time, or we both moved to a big city, or got, the same kind of job at the same time, or a big like faith revelation at the same time. So now she's kind of become the person I talk to, because we have this shared understanding and this
Yeah.
interest and this energy. And before I know it, she's somehow my bestie next summer. Like that happened. So it's all totally fluid. But there are different levels and tiers, and you make those determinations, whether unintentionally or intentionally, with all the choices you make every day. But the good news is that you need all those outer rings. So those people in the tight circle, your strong ties, are significant. And the people who are kind of on the fringes, sociologists refer to as weak ties. And the research tells us that we need them too. So we need that texture and that social variety in our lives.
That is so true. Would you say that a lot of people have a lot of strong ties or deep friendships? Or do you think it's more rare and people have maybe one or two friends that they really have a deep connection with?
Well, I know that the research is different surveys that have been done on friendship recently showed that there's been a huge decline of people who report having close friendships in the past 30 years.
Hmm.
So the number of close friends we're saying we have is going down. Um, and I think that's for a lot of different reasons. I also think that the way people might qualify or describe, or a close friendship maybe looks different. I'm not sure. But we're all walking around with different criteria. There have been a lot of like cultural and societal changes that maybe I think account for that shift as well. But what I do know for certain is that the number has gone down.
That's really, really interesting. I have found myself being in this, I don't want to say era, because I hope it's not just the, set amount of time, but I've really been in this lifestyle of trying to deepen my friendships with the friends that I've already have and then the friends that I'm pursuing. And I've noticed that when I am attempting to deepen my friendship, it requires a level of vulnerability, right? And you don't give your vulnerability to everybody. You give it to people that you're comfortable with. And sometimes it's like funny vulnerability, right? Maybe telling people stuff that's too much information, right? But also sometimes it's deeper things, things that are on your heart, things that's going on with family and things like that. But I'm sure you would agree that being vulnerable with people can be scary. So how can we step into vulnerability with our friends in order to create those deeper connections?
Yeah, well, the research tells us that it does create closeness to be vulnerable with people, and that it also endears people to us. There's something known as the beautiful mess effect, and the idea is that we tend to like people more after they're more human. It's endearing. um when it comes to knowing how or when to be more vulnerable with friends, I think there's a way to do that wisely. First, I want to say is, the best way I've heard vulnerability defined is you're taking a risk of rejection. Okay.
Mm,
Because my hot take on this, and I don't think it's a hot take, but I stand on it is vulnerability is not necessarily crying in the corner telling you about my trauma. Okay? It might be, but there's a way that people often perform vulnerability. If in your first initial interactions with people, you're talking about relatively vulnerable topics like your divorce, sex, money, trauma, addictions, mental health, the average person would say, like, oh, those are kind of like, vulnerable things. If in the first conversations with people you're talking about it, it is not vulnerability. You're
Mm,
comfortable talking about it. You like it. Okay. If there is no social risk to you, you just enjoy talking about like your mental health stuff, there's nothing wrong with that, but it's not vulnerable.
mhm,
Whatever feels like, okay, I'm going to say this and people might look at me differently, but I'm going to go for it anyway. That is vulnerability. And it's also relative. What feels vulnerable for you might not be for me, right? So for example, I have friends who feel very comfortable talking about, you know, their sex life.
yeah.
And, that's nothing to them. For me, I kind of get like, oh my God, I get, oh, even with friends, so for me, it feels like, ooh, that would be putting myself out there. And the other ones are like, girl, I'm very empowered. I own this. Let's talk details, so it's just different for people. Or maybe for one person, they're very transparent about mental health struggles. For another, that might feel very embarrassing for them. It might feel like there's going to be a stigma attached. So they're not going to talk to you about what they struggled with last winter. They're not going to talk about that. So it's very relative, but whatever feels like a social risk. The last thing I'll say on that is, it doesn't always have to be like secrets or mental health type stuff. Even cracking a joke. If you're in with a person who you guys are normally pretty technical and keep it business, and you crack a joke for the first time because you think something's funny, that's a risk. This might go sideways, but I'm going to do it to try to loosen her up. That's vulnerable. If you meet a girl for the first time and y'all get coffee and you're like, man, she's amazing, and you ask her if she wants to hang out again, that might be vulnerable for you. For an extrovert,
Yes.
probably not. Probably not. They do that and feel nothing. For you, you might feel like, man, this feels really risky. And if she says no, I don't know if I'm going to like fall apart or feel, embarrassed, but I'm going to go for it because I'm going to try. It's vulnerable for you. And so, vulnerability, like, yes, it comes with the risk that they look at you differently. That's the whole thing. But equally possible is this person feeling more connected to you and being more accepting of you and you being more known because you were vulnerable. So, that's just the risk you take.
That was such a good take. Not a hot take at all. I
Yeah.
loved that. And I really appreciate how you brought in a different perspective because I think the average person, when they think about vulnerability, they're thinking about something deep, something dark, something that's, private, but like you said, it could be just any situation where you are taking a risk and there may be rejections. I love that. I think especially like when you hang out with someone for the first couple of times and it's like, oh, I want to hang out with this person again. And it would really hurt your feelings if that person didn't text back or if they didn't make any effort into actually scheduling that plan with you. So that was a really, really refreshing take. I appreciate that. I've also noticed that over time, especially I think in this 25 to 34-year-old age group, some people are making new friends. Like some friendships are getting stronger, but also others are starting to fade away. And I think it could be because, you spent some time together in college. Now they live in California, you live in Boston, you don't see each other, you don't really make the effort to keep up. The friendship naturally fades. Or sometimes people get too busy and they don't keep up, or I don't know, there's a variety of reasons, right? But how can we gracefully navigate the end of a friendship while still honoring the good times that you had with that person? So it's not a friendship breakup, but it's just a situation where it's like you don't talk anymore, you don't see each other, so you don't really consider that person a friend anymore.
Yeah, that happens, more often, I think, than we give credit to. I think oftentimes during the conversation around friend breakups, we think about there being some kind of egregious betrayal that transpired. We think of, somebody committing some kind of major violation and having to cut them off and let them go. And we often give friendship breakups that illustration. Like that's the image we conjure up when we think of breaking up, or a friendship ending. But I think the truth is that most of the relationships you have just kind of like gradually dissolve on their own. It doesn't mean that you weren't caring or invested or committed, but it just happens. You both call each other a little less. She is not, the person you go to with this major thing anymore. She, you had certain circumstances you shared, and that's why you were friends, but then you left the job you both shared. You took up different interests that, make former interests kind of not feel good to you anymore, and things just change. And so I feel like one way to deal with that gracefully is to accept that it happens. um I think another way to kind of deal with that is to not associate friendship dissolution with personal failure.
Mm.
I see a lot of people fighting to maintain relationships that have expired because they fear what it would say about them if it ended. I have quite literally had coaching sessions with women where at some point they say, I just can't have another friendship breakup. I just can't have another friendship end. And I'm like, why? What would it say about you if this faded out? And it brings up all this other stuff like that I can't get it right, or that there's something wrong with me, and so, while I think it's worthwhile to take a look at any themes in your past relationships of why they ended, okay, are you just not communicative, or whatever it is, that it's not a failure, and to rethink uh how you see successful relationships. How do you measure success? By longevity? And if it's a successful friendship, and that means it never ends. And if it does end, then it was not successful. And how might that be a problem? So how do you determine a successful friendship? Can we say it's one in which we loved each other really well during the time when we needed each other most? Can we say it's a relationship where you grew, you developed and matured in certain areas as a person, and this person did too? So just rethinking what successful friendships look like, and to not internalize them should they dissolve.
Yeah, that's really, really refreshing. I love that. And appreciating the times and the memories that you shared with each other. And, maybe if you see them again, you can pick back up where you left off, and maybe that will respark a friendship flame, or maybe that was just the one blip and then you go back to, your separate lives. But you mentioned friendship breakups. Now, we're not going to have a whole conversation about that, but I know that's a big topic. But I want to talk about working through conflict in friendships, because I did a poll on my Instagram a few weeks ago, and a lot of people were like, yeah, I don't really know how to work through conflict with my friends. And from your research, what have you found are some of the most common conflicts in specifically female friendships?
Oh God. Okay. So so first of all, that's like a whole section of the book. We have the book, In Fighting for Our Friendships. There are three sections. And the second part of it is all about some of the most common friendship issues that I hear. And so I could give you the list of like the jealous friends, the flaky friends, like we could do that. I want to go more aerial view though. And in the book I share a framework that I developed called the three affinities of female friendship. And from my 6-7 years of studying the research on women's cooperation, I kept noticing these themes. So no matter if I was looking at any discipline, sociology, psychology, anthropology, whatever, it kept coming down to these three things. Okay. So the three things that bond us, and by extension, dissolve friendships if they're not present, are secrecy, symmetry, and support.
Hmm.
If you have these three things in a female friendship, you feel very close. As soon as you feel like one is absent or imbalanced, then it starts to create tension. That's the root of every conflict I've identified. It's one of those three things. So, support is relatively obvious. Emotional support. The research tells us it's the number one thing that women look for in their same sex friendships: emotional support. Now, naturally, as soon as I feel like you're not supporting me, then I have an issue. The
Mm-hmm.
problem is I have not articulated to you how I want to be supported. And I feel like I don't have to, because if you were my friend, you would just know. So a lot of that comes up as an issue: support. The other is symmetry. It's very important for women to feel a sense of sameness in their friendships. I am you, you are me. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean we want our friends to be clones, but perceived symmetry accounts for depth and connection. So this might be threatened if I feel like my friend's judging me, how I parent, who I date. She's making comments. By extension, it makes her look like she sees herself as superior, right? Instead of we're on the same level. So things that lack reciprocity, sameness, symmetry are going to be an issue. And finally, secrecy. So not necessarily just literal secrets, but the essence of that. So, unlike men who tend to congregate in groups, women are very dyadic, dyadic, dyadic. We pair off, we pair off. And that accounts for why we experience more platonic intimacy because it's just one to one. There's nowhere to escape. It's just me and you. Well, we like knowing that we're in this mutually exclusive vault where we engage in self disclosure. I share, you share, I share. That is the glue of women's friendships. So as soon as I feel like you're not sharing with me, you don't tell me anything anymore, or you tell other people things first, or you tell me too much, right? I feel overwhelmed by like how often she comes to me with her needs. I feel it's not balanced. It's, I feel burdened, right? So the balance part, the equilibrium is really important. And so those three things, and we call them the three affinities of female friendship, those are at the root of most of women's issues. But the good news is it doesn't mean that immediately friendship's over. It just might mean we need to recalibrate, and it helps to give some language for what might be wrong so we have some direction for where to start repair.
Nice. Okay, so I'm assuming you have some of that language in your book. Again, very excited to read it. Listeners, make sure y'all read it too. But tell me, like, how can we recalibrate with those friends when we've had, and I love the three affinities really covered so much. Like any issue I'm thinking of, I mean, you hit on it with those three affinities. But how can we navigate those conversations with our friends when we're maybe not feeling supported, or maybe we feel overwhelmed by a friend, things like that?
Yeah. So the first thing with conflict is to give your guys's like to give each other permission to have it, which sounds so obvious, but it's so normal to have tension. Like you anticipate having tension at work. You anticipate having issues with your boo. Like there's whole books on it, like how to be a better girlfriend, a stronger couple. Like you already know going into it, we're probably going to get into it, but you feel comfortable talking about it because you anticipated it. We don't really anticipate or give room for conflict in friendships because a lot of us subscribe to the idea that if you're my friend, we shouldn't have issues. And we see having an issue as evidence that we're not as
Mm.
close as I thought. We don't do that anywhere else.
Yeah, that's
So
so
we have
true.
to first make space for like, oh, we're probably going to get into it sometimes. As soon as you do that, it becomes less all or nothing when tension does happen. Like, oh my God, like, is this the end? Is this, it's like, oh yeah, this is what human relationships are. Okay. So that's the first mindset so that it doesn't feel so intense when you have it. It's not evidence that y'all aren't meant to be friends. It's evidence that you are two people with your independent set of goals, needs, boundaries, and desires. And so at some point, it's probably going to inevitably clash at some point. Uh, the second thing is to go in by clearly saying what the issue is, but make it an invitation, not an accusation. So instead of you're always late, you're every time we get together, you're late. And it feels like disrespectful. It feels disrespectful of my time. I'm telling her with periods on it what the issue is with the period. I'm not asking questions to invite her into the conversation, which also shows a certain intellectual arrogance because I'm assuming I know all the details and factors of what's going on. And here's my assessment. I'm not making room for like, hey, what's going on? Are we meeting up like too late? Do we need to make it weekends instead of weeknights? Do we need to meet closer to your house? What's going on? Okay. Help me understand. Okay. That always really helps. Right.
Yeah.
And then I'm not using language that shows that this is a character deficit. And one of my theories is, and we're researching this, we're putting together a team to research this now, but one of my theories is that women do this more often than men, in my experience. It's called fundamental attribution theory. And the idea is that when we make a mistake, we attribute it to our circumstances. So if I was late, it's because traffic. If you're late, it's a character thing. You
Mm.
don't respect my time. You're being selfish. It's the third time you just don't care. You are taking advantage of my niceness. I'm doing all that. But when it's me, it's because, I mean, well, yeah, it's like traffic's crazy. I didn't mean to.
Yeah.
Okay. So, how quickly do you go to making this a thing about her, a person? And it happens quick. If she doesn't text you back when she said she texts you back, do you assume, like, okay, here we go? I'm assuming she's starting to lose interest, and I guess she's not as invested as I am, like, in this friendship. And like, why are you gonna like be dishonest? Like, don't tell me you're gonna, or is it like, oh, I wonder why she didn't text me back? Maybe she got busy. I don't know. If I don't hear from her, I'm gonna text her again in the morning. Okay. And if she does it often, because I don't want you to be naive, then it's, hey, I know sometimes you aren't able to circle back. Is just text not your thing? Do you just want to do phone calls? Right. Because you tell me you're going to text, so I expect it. And then it throws me off for like the rest of the day. I'm not able to plan. So how do you want to do this? You just want to do phone calls? Boom. Done. I brought up the issue. I'm posing it as an invitation because I want more of your time. That's really at the heart
Yeah.
of the matter. I want more of your time. I'm not accusing you, and I'm trying to find solutions. What can we do? And then I'm showing you I'm going to show up after. I'm still here. So instead of like, hey, you always say you're going to text and you don't, and you cancel, and that, like, that's so annoying. And I just can't be friends with people who like don't respect that. Okay.
Yeah.
It's just when you cancel plans, girl, like it throws me off. I don't know what we're doing. I'm waiting on you. Come on now. What do we need to do? You want to do it on weekends instead of weekdays? What are we doing? Okay.
Hmm.
Okay, so how do you want to do next weekend? Because I'm showing you I'm still here, but that ain't gonna work. But I'm still here for you next weekend. What's the plans? Okay, so I think this shows a certain resilience, and you'll also find that you're able to relax in friendships where both people operate this way. I don't have to do the game of, is she mad at me? What was that
Hmm.
supposed to mean? I wonder if she. I feel like the people. This is the last thing I'll say. I've noticed that with my friends, the women I'm closest to or when I can relax with because they speak their mind. They're not rude. There's nothing like that. But in a very loving way, they feel very comfortable saying, okay, Danielle, what did you mean by that? Because I feel some kind of way.
Hmm.
Or Danielle, that was a little, you had a little too much heat on that. What's going on? Or Danielle, come on now. Like you said, you'd call me back on Saturday. What's happening? I can relax. Because if at any point they feel offended or have a need, I know I don't have to guess. I don't have to decode. I don't have to try to read the subtext. They feel comfortable giving me direction and I can relax. And so you will notice more depth and security and less anxiousness in your friendships if you both get very comfortable lovingly inviting each other to the table of navigating how to best love one another. But you can't do that if you won't give each other the data on how to love each other well.
That is so good. Like, honestly, my mind is blown. I love that. And I think, like, in work situations, we're often encouraged to, like, come with a solution, but like, you're basically bringing
Mm,
that into a friendship. Like, you're stating, this is what I feel as though you did. This is how I felt. But like you said, should we meet somewhere closer to your house? Is 10 o'clock on Saturdays just not a good time for you? I really like that. And I think that could help your friend not feel like they're being attacked when you're just speaking in statements, like you mentioned earlier. So that was really, really good. I feel like I could talk about friendships with you all day, but unfortunately, we're at the end of the episode. But I like to end each episode just asking guests, like, what is one or two pieces of advice that you have for people that are in their 20s that are trying to navigate life, or in this specific situation, people that are trying to figure out their friendships?
yeah. There are so many things I could say, but one thing I find myself uh, sharing in response to lots of different needs and intentions people bring to me is this, and that is you have to adopt connection as an identity and not just a behavior, and it will solve a lot of your issues. So instead of seeing connection as something you're going to do, in the new year I'm going to be more social, I'm going to go out more, I'm going to do the, you're listing out and itemizing all the behaviors that you're going to do more of. I'm going to, be more extroverted. I'm going to, okay, that's very noble, and I love the intentionality behind it. But I found that it becomes more organic and consistent when you begin to adopt being a connector as a part of who you are. And there's research that shows that people who do that about things are more consistent over time. So, for example, when you hear a person say, I love dogs, and you hear another person say, I'm a dog lover, that second person feels more serious. If
Mhm.
you hear a person say, I like to run, and another person says, I am a runner, I feel like this is like the essence of who this woman is. Like those examples. I'm not, a person who likes to connect, and I connect sometimes and I socialize sometimes. I am a connector. When you adopt that as a part of your identity, everything else is an extension of that identity. So when you're thinking about saying hello to that person who's walking by, well, but I don't know if she's not going to say hi. I do it because that's who I am. I'm saying hello. Whether you say hi back or not, that's who I am. If you're on my mind, I'm not going to talk myself out of like, well, should I text her? Because I don't know. Like maybe she's busy with, I'm a connector. I'm reaching out. Hey, you crossed my mind. Do you want to get together tomorrow? I know there's a chance of rejection, but I'm a connector. It's who I am. So whether you can't make it, or whether you tell me, Danielle, I don't like you anymore, I keep putting myself out there because it's who I am. I can't turn that off. And you will solve a lot of social connection type issues, whether it's with initiating, whether it's with repairing and conflict. So instead of avoiding, I'm a connector. So this is what I do. Hey, I feel like you're pulling back. I haven't heard from you as much. Are we okay? As opposed to pulling back, trying to read between the line of her Instagram caption. Like, okay, is this about me? Is this about me? I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm not doing that. I'm a connector. Like, let's repair. What's going on? Because I feel like we haven't hung out as much. I just want to make sure we're okay. And I trust that you would tell me what's going on. Okay. So adopt that as your identity and sit back and watch how so many beautiful things in your life will blossom from accepting that this is who you are. It's not just something that you do or a behavior that you try on in these fleeting moments of confidence. No, it's just something, it's someone you are through and through. And I've seen people's lives change by showing up in that way.
That's really, really awesome and very motivating, and also good timing as people are preparing for 2025. Like you can start to get yourself and your mindset ready, saying, I'm a connector, I'm blank, whatever, in preparation for next year. And you can embody whatever it is that you put in there. So that's really awesome. Thank you so much, Danielle.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I enjoyed this conversation, and I know there are plenty of people you can talk friendship stuff with. So I don't take it for granted that you've invited me to share this space. And I just enjoy talking about all things, connection, because it really is a matter of our health and happiness.
For sure. So where can people buy your book? And then two, where can people find you on social media?
Yeah, so the book, the podcast, all the things, everything lives at betterfemalefriendships.com.
Awesome. Perfect. And then I'll have that link down below in the description box along with all your social media handles. But this was great. I'm sure the listeners got lots of good nuggets and feel motivated as they're working on their friendships, specifically their female friendships. And they're going to hit 2025 off with stronger, better friendships. Thank you guys so much for tuning into today's episode. I really hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Like, literally, we could have kept talking for like another couple of hours because I have so many questions. She has so many good insights. But if you want more, you have a few options, okay? You can follow Danielle on social media. Her Instagram is at Danielle Bayard Jackson. I'll have that link down below in the description. Or if you're a TikToker, while we still have access to the platform, you can follow Danielle on her TikTok page, which is at the Friendship Expert. And then, like I mentioned, Danielle has a podcast called Friend Forward, which is so good. And it really is centered around building better female friendships. So you can follow her Instagram, Friend Forward. You can find the podcast literally on any podcast platform. And I promise you, your soul will be fed every single time she has an episode. And of course, if you're not already following Graduated and Grown on social media, it's at Graduated and Grown everywhere. And also, don't forget to check out Danielle's book. I'll also have a link to that, maybe from Amazon, down in the description box. But y'all, I told you it was a good episode. Just a heads up, next week there will not be a new episode because it's Christmas week. So I'm taking some time off from the podcast. But don't worry, I'll be back very soon with some more exciting topics and I'll share what I got into for the holidays. But I appreciate you guys. I hope you have a great holiday season and we will chat very soon. Bye.